It's December 19th, and this is the last episode of the 2016 season for the K-12 Engineering Education Podcast. If you're a teacher, you might notice more kids in your classroom with autism, attention disorders, learning disabilities, or other diagnoses that mark a neurologically diverse group of kids. This episode focuses on one kind of neurodiversity, autism spectrum disorders. Is it really true that autistic kids gravitate more to science, technology, engineering, and math? How do you integrate students on the autism spectrum with neurotypical students or students without these diagnoses? What practical tips are there for letting these kids succeed in engineering? We talked to a researcher, a school occupational therapist, and a teacher to find out.
Thinking about the youth and not just my kids. Hate to see them growing hard, just like I did.
Dr. Jennifer Yu studies education and students with disabilities at the nonprofit research institute SRI International in California. Jennifer also used to be a high school science teacher. Recently, I called her up over Skype to talk about her work.
The work that I do and the research interests that I have are specifically around kids with disabilities. And so I look at things like, what are some of the factors that can really improve the educational outcomes and basically, the lives of these students with disabilities. More recently, I've had a real specific interest in autism, and we recently had received a grant from the National Science Foundation to look at autism and STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, to see kind of what the convergence is there. What is there really some truth to all this, anecdotal evidence that we have that people with autism and people on the spectrum, must be really geeky and really gravitating toward kind of engineering type fields.
Can I ask you if you had any, say, personal interest in that, or was you kind of got sucked into the project because of the NSF grant?
Well, the NSF grant actually came about because I'm based in Silicon Valley, and I'm married to an engineer, and so I'm kind of immersed in this tech world around me, and so you hear a lot of people just kind of throwing around the term like autism and being on the spectrum and just sort of equating that naturally to people who are programmers or engineers, like, oh yeah, that person is an amazing coder, he must be on the spectrum or something like that. Everyone just seems to just naturally think this must be the case, but when I would actually look in to see, what does the evidence show us, I realized there wasn't really that much empirical evidence, so there weren't real data to support this, just a lot of anecdotes, and there are some studies that have been done, mainly by Simon Baron-Cohen and his group in the UK, but not really much work that's been done on a large scale in the US. And so because I am a disabilities researcher and I've had the opportunity to work with some really large data sets that look at kids with disabilities, I thought, hey, here's a great opportunity for me to really decide and find out if, in fact, there is some truth to this kind of stereotype that we have. And so when we kind of delved into it, my collaborator, Xing Wei, and I, we realized that, there actually is some truth to this. So looking, at some data that looks specifically at college-age students with disabilities, we found that those who have autism seem to be significantly more likely to pursue STEM fields, STEM majors, than the general population of kids. We found 34% were majoring in STEM, whereas only about 22% or 20%, I believe, major in STEM from kind of the general population. So that kind of put us on that path to thinking about like, hey, there's something here, and really trying to delve deeper into that.
Yeah, so that's really great. And I saw a little bit of that study. I read your writings on that. Did you look into any of the possible reasons why they go into STEM more?
Yeah, so the data that we used, so I should point out the data set was based on this large existing data set called the National Longitudinal Transition Study 2, or NLTS2. So what we did is what we call like secondary analysis. So we analyze, data that's already out there. And so one of the limitations of that is that we can't really ask any follow-up questions, right, because all the data is already there. But we did really start delving into that, looking looking more at the literature, looking at what other studies have shown. And, there is some evidence to show that there might be, some genetic influence. There was a study that was done that showed that kids who came from parents who are engineers, there seemed to be like a higher incidence of autism among those kids. So, why is that the case? No one really knows yet. But also, similarly, we find that pockets of where there's like big tech hubs, so definitely Silicon Valley, but really like across the country and even around the world, we find that there seems to be a larger prevalence of kids with autism in these tech hubs. So, yeah, there's that kind of evidence to support this. But beyond that, all we have really to go on are some theories that have said, well, it could be that kids with autism are, what we call sort of systemizers, right? So some of the characteristics of autism is that they tend to really perseverate on things. If there's something that really interests them, they're really going to focus in on it, and they're just going to keep at it and problem solve. And they also have kind of a very structured, linear sort of way of thinking. And all of that actually plays really well into a lot of these STEM fields, that those are the same characteristics that would make you a great engineer or would make you a great, computer or science programmer. So those are some of the reasons that we think that we may see this kind of relationship between STEM and autism.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that. I've met quite a few engineering teachers, high school engineering teachers, who've, like you said, thrown around that stereotype of like, certain kids who might be on the spectrum, as they say, they are really into engineering or STEM. And so that's interesting that you have some research to back that up. Is there more research being done to try and answer these questions?
I think there's definitely growing interest. Mainly because, we can't ignore the fact that, for whatever reason, there does seem to be this, increasing prevalence of autism within our society. So I think now the statistic is 1 in 68 kids with autism are out there in the U.S. And so as we see this larger number of kids, we think, okay, what are the things that we can do to support them and to help them? But then also let's think about the flip side. Like, what is it about these characteristics of these individuals that could also actually be sort of beneficial to society? Mm-hmm. And so definitely, in a world where STEM oftentimes kind of dominates, and we really need to have people, especially in the U.S., who do have more of this kind of STEM focus. Like, if this is a group that may naturally have this interest and to gravitate towards STEM, like let's find out more, and let's see if there are ways that we can really kind of help propel them in that direction. So yeah, I would say that there is an increasing interest in doing that kind of research and providing those kinds of supports and services.
You mentioned also that there's definitely a lot of strengths, it seems, when it comes to kids with autism or autism spectrum disorders and their skills or interest in going into STEM and engineering. There might also be some disadvantages. Is there research that you know of saying that kids with autism spectrum disorder may face any extra challenges when getting higher education or going into STEM?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, even in our research, when we found these really positive outcomes in terms of, these kids with autism really seem to gravitate towards STEM and go on to major in STEM in college, that's great news. Mm-hmm. But the flip side of that is the fact that there aren't that many kids with autism who are going on to college. And now, I should say that we're talking about autism, and I say that really speaking about the whole spectrum of disorders. And so, there's obviously those who, fall on the spectrum that's maybe the more classic definition of autism, which are, the nonverbal kids, or those who may also have some kind of intellectual disability. But then even among those who academically may be doing extremely well, they're struggling. And I think a lot of that really speaks to kind of the social and the communication problems and challenges that they may face. When we think about the kinds of supports we can provide to them, a lot of that really is based on what we call these soft skills, right? So this ability to communicate effectively, to collaborate, to, try and empathize, put yourself in the other person's shoes. And I think those are the kinds of things that we really do need to work on to support these individuals so that they can go on to college or they can go on to careers and are able to live independently, whether or not they are, they have great IQs or not. Like if you don't have all those skills in place, you really are going to be challenged in our society.
Would you say that there's still research that's ongoing for how to best teach these kids then?
I think so, yeah. I mean, when we try to think about things like the best practices for supporting, kids with autism, there are certain things, certain tools that we can use. So, we can provide them with a much more kind of scheduled like a schedule of, the day-to-day, provide them with more visual supports. So those are little things that we can do. But really, in order to best support a person with autism, I think it's first important to recognize, and this is a term you're going to hear often from people who are in the kind of autism community. When you meet one person with autism, you have met just one person with autism, meaning that there is just so much diversity in terms of their, specific personalities and their characteristics. And so really the best thing you can do is kind of observe them and try to find out, what are the things that are appealing to them? What are the triggers that may kind of set them off? So these are some of the things that I think, teachers or educators, people who are trying to support people with autism, can do in order to provide the best kind of environment for learning.
So given the caveat that we know that it's really hard to make that one-size-fits-all solution, what strategies do you know of that some teachers specifically use to help some of these kids with autism?
Well, I think, like I said earlier, things like providing kind of visual cues are obviously going to be very beneficial, I think, really to all kids, to all people. So honestly, I think a lot of the things that may benefit those with autism are really meant to benefit, like, everyone. So like the visualization, being able to give kids a schedule, to say, okay, first we're going to do this, and then we're going to move on to this, because honestly, the transitions are some of the hardest things, because that's when things are in flux and there's chaos. And for someone who is kind of ritualistic in their thinking, or, needs to know what's happening next, that's a time when they're just going to sort of kind of freeze up, right? It's going to be sort of a tense time for them. So anything we can do to alleviate that, I think, would be extremely helpful. And also, when you think about the environment, a lot of teachers like to have, like, really colorful posters and a lot of artwork or things to help kind of stimulate students. And so they may have lots of vibrant colors or things like that in their classroom, and that may actually have the opposite effect for someone on the spectrum, because they can so easily be distracted and, may become sensory overload for them.
Another thing you said struck me, because it sounded so similar to what a professor at the University of Florida was telling me. She specifically focuses on helping kids in the STEM programs at that university who happen to have learning disabilities. And she was basically wondering the same thing, that to teach kids with autism the best, or a lot of learning disabilities the best, it often just sounds like regular good old pedagogy, like good pedagogy skills that would apply to every student. Yeah.
There is, this area of research and design in kind of the disabilities world that we call universal design for learning. And that's really this idea of, kind of taking these sort of ideas that are on the periphery and sort of coming, bringing it to the middle. And we can think about this, for instance, in terms of things like, when we provide wheelchair ramps, right? That's really meant to help, I guess, people who are in wheelchairs. But I have kids, and I remember when I had little kids and I had my stroller, and I'm struggling to get them around, all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, these ramps are a godsend. And then, going through a door, gosh, make sure the door is wide enough, not only for a wheelchair, but it's also going to help me in my stroller. So a lot of these things that we think should benefit kids with autism, if you think about it, actually would really be beneficial to everyone.
That's a good thing for the engineers listening to hear, because that's definitely a principle that I do hear a lot. A lot of these supposed innovations that might be for, you think, a targeted customer group are actually for everyone. So that's really neat to hear.
Yeah, and in education, I think this is where technology gets really exciting for us because a lot of these kind of universal design concepts can really be applied in technology. So basic things are like, text to speech has been helpful, increasing font size, like all of these things aren't that difficult to apply and really can help a lot of different kids because there are a lot of different types of learners, right?
Mm-hmm.
And definitely could help those with autism as well.
Jennifer, you wrote I think a blog post. I keep referring to that, but you talked about some research that you had done about students with autism spectrum disorders entering college, and you compared 2-year versus 4-year colleges. Can you tell me a little bit about that research and what you found?
Yeah, definitely. I think that some of the key takeaways from that study that we did was, first off, that 2-year colleges are actually really beneficial for kids with autism. I think part of that is because community colleges are just such a nice transition for these students who, now have to move on to kind of an independent, living situation, an independent environment if they were just to go straight to a 4-year college. Having that sort of kind of cushion for them, both in terms of, being able to familiarize themselves with kind of, the college mentality and the way that, classes are run, while still sort of having that safety net of, the family nearby to support them. I think those are the kinds of things that make community colleges especially appealing. And one of the things that we saw that was really interesting is that specifically for STEM fields, we found that those who were in 2-year community colleges were much more likely to then kind of persist on. And I think persistence is an important thing because, it's one thing to be able to get into college and then to, enroll in college, but then it's quite another thing to actually follow through, right? To be able to actually graduate with that degree. And, this is something that's difficult for all students. I think that we find, there's a lot of dropout that occurs for college kids. And definitely this is the case for autism as well. And so to see that 2-year colleges seem to help with that sort of persistence and moving forward, I mean, that's huge. And that really speaks to having community colleges play a really key role in really furthering the education for these students with autism.
Yeah. Did you see that article recently? There's a couple articles about how Microsoft has a special hiring program for candidates with autism.
Yeah. So SAP was one company that really took this on. They called it their Autism to Work initiative. And they have a goal of, by 2020, they want to have a fairly significant portion of their employee pool be people with autism. And so and I think other tech companies are kind of jumping on board, Microsoft being one of them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Is there any planned research about that, or what do you think about that?
I think that it's a great idea. I think it kind of is based on a lot of, the research that we have done, the research that was done, like I mentioned, in the UK. So recognizing that there is this evidence now to support this idea that autism and STEM do, kind of merge nicely together. I don't know if there has been that much evaluation that's been done of these specific programs, and I would love to see that myself if there has been. It definitely makes sense, though, and I think one thing that's interesting is that at least for one of those companies, I know that they've worked very closely with advocacy groups and other organizations that can provide them with some better understanding of how to work with people with autism. And so, for instance, their interview process is not your typical interview process where, it would be me talking with you in the pure social environment, which is the most nightmarish thing you can imagine for someone who doesn't want to be social, right? So instead, they do things like they'll give them problems to solve. They may have them tinker with Legos and have them build things and use that as the gateway to identify people who they think may be promising candidates. And from that, they would then provide them with kind of a social skills support group and training before they and give them kind of an internship that involves this sort of social skills component to it before they then actually really immerse themselves into working for various groups within Microsoft or, SAP or these other companies. So it's a really cool model. It's really interesting, and I would love to see how that works. And hopefully we will have some research in the coming years to find out.
Yeah, me too. I'm interested in that. I'm just waiting for the day when that research bleeds over into the general population and then we revamp how we interview for all companies and all positions.
Yeah, exactly, right? The current interview process, I don't know. I mean, is it really, I guess if you're, trying to find a job where it is really about like talking with people and really communicating one-on-one and that sort of, environment, maybe that's beneficial, but there's a lot of other skills you're not going to be able to capture and understand from that, traditional interview process. So again, like a lot of the things that, are benefiting people with autism, people with disabilities really can apply to the whole population.
Okay, well, closing thoughts before I let you go.
No. I mean, this is fun. Thanks for the opportunity to talk, and hopefully we will continue to be doing more research, and we'll have more conversations further down the road.
That was Dr. Jennifer Yu of SRI International. You can find links to the research articles mentioned in our conversation in the show notes. We now leave the research world to hear the perspective of someone directly in the field.
My name is Marci Schneider, and I'm an occupational therapist.
Besides being an occupational therapist, or OT, Marci is a doctoral candidate in rehabilitation science at the University of Florida. She's been practicing as an OT for the past 18 years, focusing on students with special needs in the K-12 school system. Like many OTs across American school districts, she says she's seen a significant amount of autism spectrum disorder in this time. Marci spoke to me over the phone, and I asked her first what characteristics would distinguish an autistic student in the classroom.
Well, I think that is a very challenging statement because the spectrum is so broad, but I think that some of the characteristics that do stand out are there's a lot of sensory needs. They have a hard time with noise. They have a hard time with being in places that are very loud. They have a hard time being in closed spaces. They may see that the children gravitate towards the edge of the class instead of being in the middle of the class. They may see that the children tend to get up and want to walk around a lot, or they may want to stand to work.
A lot of engineering classes at this level, they're very project-based and hands-on, and oftentimes they have to work in groups with other kids.
Yes.
What struggles would kids on the autism spectrum, what struggles would they face in these types of classes?
Well, I think the hands-on pulls in the strength of the students, because written work is usually an area that is much more challenging, and hands-on is an area of strength. However, working collaboratively is an area that's much more difficult. So I think when the teachers can be aware of helping the students maybe ahead of time, knowing how to navigate and maybe knowing what their designated role is, and may be very helpful in helping them organize. Organizational skills are also very challenging.
In your work as an OT, did you help teachers develop those skills to work with these children?
Yes, and that's something that I've been very involved in, is helping teachers with developing and implementing accommodations into the classroom to help the students. And this is something that we've been very active in, is looking at, what kind of expectations we're going to be made of the student in the classroom, and looking at group projects and academic expectations, and then looking at, how can we help the student be successful? And that's one thing, at looking at, okay, can we tell them ahead of time what they're going to need to be able to do? And then looking at, okay, what's our expectation? Is it we want them to be socially successful? Is that going to be the goal? Then maybe the academic expectation could be secondary. A lot of times giving them the steps ahead of time, knowing that a lot of times the students will shut down before they even start because the whole task will be very overwhelming. So it's very helpful to break it down into steps and having a visual guideline.
Like pictures of what they're going to be doing in the day, or?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, a picture, or, depending on, where their skill level may be, it could be written instructions.
Yeah.
It helps the teacher to maybe have an extra set of hands come in and just be able to brainstorm and say, what does this child need that may be above and beyond what the curriculum is set up for. And, we have to take a look around the classroom and say, okay, well, let's look at this environment. It may be that the classroom is overwhelming just in the way it's set up. Mm-hmm. Or, what really is not, working, and how can we make this child fit in and be successful? So it helps the teacher because they have all the students to think about every class all day long, and then they have an extra person to come in and just look at this one student and how they can make them fit into the curriculum. So, and it is good teaching strategies, but it's just coming at it from a different angle.
Mm-hmm. It's clear that an occupational therapist and other helpers would be great for helping the teachers accommodate these students. How should a teacher address the other students in the classroom? Does the teacher have to help the other kids work with the student with autism?
That has always been our approach, which has been, inclusion, because we want the child to be successful in life. Mm-hmm. And what we have done is just educate everyone, and sometimes it's a sensitivity training to just teach everyone that everyone may be a little bit different, and that we learn. And I think sometimes the children have grown up with their peers, so they know that, they have learned from the time they were, younger, and they've come up together. So they start learning at a very young age that, their friends are maybe just a little bit different and have different challenges. So the teachers help with that. Mm-hmm. And we've had instances where the school counselor will come in and help with that and do some sessions with the children, and this happens more at the elementary age, and maybe do a story with the children and teach them about how people are different. And so we've had to do that some with the children and especially with a child with autism spectrum disorder. And I think that's been very successful. But the goal is always that everyone is learning that this is what's appropriate, and this is what we do. We work together.
I know that you've had a lot of successes, but if someone is facing resistance in their classroom to having a child with autism spectrum disorder,
yes,
what do you say to that student or to that teacher? Like, if someone doesn't think that student can be in an engineering or a STEM classroom, what would you say to those people?
Oh, yes. I have had challenges for absolutely, and we've had challenges where we've tried accommodations, and I've tried to implement an accommodation, and I've shown back up the next week, and the teacher said this didn't work, and we've tried to explain to them that you cannot try an accommodation once. That doesn't work. Some things are going to work one day and not the next. You have to realize that you have to have your bag of tricks, especially for the children that have more intense needs. Some days something's going to work, and some days something else is going to work. And, you have to just advocate for the children. And that's the approach that we take. We're just here to advocate for the child, and they deserve a chance. And sometimes we win them over, and sometimes we don't. so we keep trying, and I think that every child needs someone at the ground level at the school, and the parents really appreciate that. So, and I think the other important thing is that we listen to the child. a lot of times the adults get rolling and they forget that the child can give their own input. And we remember to get the child's input and make sure that we're listening to the child.
Do you ever run into the challenge of kids in K-12 thinking that they can't do engineering or STEM if they have some kind of disability or autism spectrum disorder?
Well, I think what's funny is that all of the children I think that I have worked with, that is their primary area of interest.
They love STEM.
They love STEM. That's what they want to do. They all want to make movies. They all want to make video games. That's what they want to do. That's STEM.
They've all been super creative and everything?
That's their area of interest. They all have, STEM is their area of interest.
Is there anything you think teachers in elementary, middle school, high school should know that maybe we didn't talk about yet, especially if they're teaching these engineering skills?
I know one thing, the teachers that I've worked with, we have found that communicating with the parents over the organizational skills are a real issue. And Google Classroom has been very successful.
What do you mean?
There's using Google Classroom so that the teachers can make sure all the assignments and what the students are expected to do is on Google Classroom, because the students have such a hard time keeping up with their work. And then that way the parents can log on to Google Classroom and then help them keep track of their assignments. So, because they have such a hard time with their organizational skills and they get caught up in their area of interest, that keeping up with their classwork has been such an area of stress.
I see, because they're focusing so much on the thing that they like.
That they get behind on all their assignments, or they'll write they'll get them in class, but they'll forget to bring them home. And so organization is a real issue.
I know that you mentioned earlier that technology really helps.
Yes.
What other technology have you used that might help for STEM classrooms?
So the other thing, as far as technology, there's a lot of free apps and extensions that you can access through Google Apps. You can use things like Read and Write or Readability, but these are apps and extensions that allow you to they'll read the text out loud, or it can highlight the text. So things where maybe if the students are not strong readers, or so if there's instructions for the projects, or things where they're using the computer to build, or because some of these, they may be very savvy about not navigating around the computer, but if it's something with extensive reading, it may be more challenging. And the other thing we did with one of our students, he did not tolerate the transition between class periods because it was so crowded in the hallways. And he was going into every classroom stressed out and upset. So we let him transition between classes 5 minutes early, so he went to the next class all by himself in the hallway. And he was like a different child, just like that. And then all of a sudden he could function. One child wears earplugs in every class because it's too loud. So things like that where the OT can just, kind of pick up on those little subtle things that the teachers may not really know, but it seems like common sense, but it's not common sense. And you're like, why is this kid so stressed out in my class? I can't figure it out. And it's like, well, he's sitting in the middle. I think he needs to sit in the back. This one kid uses a rocking chair, instead of the teacher yelling at him to put the chair down instead of until he tips it over. Like things like that.
Yeah, it sounds very customized for every child, of course. What would you say to the other kids in the classroom about the benefits of having another kid in the class with autism?
I would say that this is one of your friends, and we need your help. This is what we do. I think I would talk to them about compassion, and I would talk to them about understanding, and I think they need to be educated on what autism is, because I think that at that age they're old enough to understand.
That was Marci Schneider, school occupational therapist in Florida. Links to the teacher resources that Marci mentioned are in the show notes. Finally, here's a part of a conversation with Melanie Kong, a past guest and a high school engineering teacher in the Seattle area who's teaching in a new school this year. She's had autistic students, and I asked her if she has had to teach them differently.
I don't feel like I need to teach those kids in a different way. I think what changes is the way I'm facilitating the group work. And what I've noticed so far teaching at this new school, I've seen such an outstanding job with the kids at trying to make sure everyone is included. And I think that's been really wonderful so far. It's team members asking each other, like, hey, what can I do to help? Or when a student with autism is trying to, like, hey, what can I do? Or I don't understand this and I'd help, I don't know what you're saying. They've been really patient in trying to be clear and trying to make sure that every student is heard. So I think that for me, I'm not changing my instruction very much. What I am changing is just making sure that I'm more aware of these students. I'm being more aware that they have a different way of thinking and that they might be able to bring a different perspective, and making sure that their team members respect and acknowledge that.
Okay, so your engineering class is very team-based, and so I could see how facilitating the social interactions would be really important. Are there any tips, anything you could give as advice to someone else, a first-year teacher who's experiencing this?
I've been doing a very intentional job towards the beginning of the school year to set up these expectations of teamwork. And I've been doing that by having structured lessons that really show, hey, we all have different ways of thinking, and it's important to respect that. And I think one great lesson that I did, and this came from Ellen Brown, who's been on this podcast before, but she does a very simple activity. She just calls it the birds activity. But kids get as much time as they need, 2 to 5 minutes, to list as many names of birds that they can. And they come up with this list. And then afterwards, they compare at their team, and they don't only compare what are the names on my list, but they compare what are the ways that you thought about this. And different kids will have different strategies. Some kids were like, hey, I just thought about all the sports teams that are out there. And other kids are like, I went through I went on a mind travel around the Woodland Park Zoo, and I visited downtown Seattle, and I imagined the seagulls there. So these kids all have different ways of thinking about the problem. But then you also have some kids who are like, oh, Pidgey's a bird, and so is woodpecker, and roadrunner, and Donald Duck, right? So you'll get all different kinds of names, and then they really realize it's a really low entry activity, but they really realize that we all have different ways of thinking about this problem. It's sometimes the people who don't have experience in this who can be the most creative with it. And it was some of my autistic kids who happened to be really happen to know a lot about birds, and they brought so much knowledge and their bird expertise to the table. And I think it just really showed, because after they finished the team debrief, they individually, again, brainstormed as many names of birds as they could. And of course, every kid's list goes up, and they talk about, it's because I followed the strategy this other team member gave to me. So a very simple activity like that really just showed the kids that, yeah, it doesn't matter where we're coming from. We all have different ways of thinking about this. And there's something valuable about me trying to think in the way that you're thinking.
Thank you to my guests in today's episode, Melanie Kong, Marci Schneider, and Dr. Jennifer Yu. I'd appreciate it if you'd share your own thinking with me about the show so far. Please subscribe to the show and leave reviews and comments on iTunes, SoundCloud, Twitter, and all that same stuff. Get the details at the website k12engineering.net. This is the last episode for 2016, and it'll be a little while before we start up again, but I am excited to get to Season 2 in the next couple months. Thank you for the support, and here's to engineering education in 2017. Our opening music comes from School Zone, the radio edit by the Honorable Sleaze. Our closing music is from Late for School by Bleep Tour. Both are used under Creative Commons Attribution licenses. The K-12 Engineering Education Podcast is a production of Pios Labs. Hey, one last reminder in 2016, if you can come to the South by Southwest Festival in March 2017 in Austin, Texas, come say hi to Rachel and me. We'll be there at the South by Southwest EDU playground to introduce a STEAM curriculum on electronic quilts. And we'll also be at the South by Southwest Interactive Festival to train all you business types in how improv games can help you be a better designer. We hope you can join us.